This is our 2005 PT Cruiser. The right front wheel was making a growling noise, a scraping noise. So we took it to our local Chrysler dealer and asked them what the problem was. They said, oh, it was the front wheel bearings, but the bearings aren't covered under the 5 or 7 year, 70,000 mile warranty. And when I called the main customer service number, they told me the same thing. So I decided to do the work myself. I started on the right side. First thing I did is jack this car up and I removed the right front tire. Okay, so the first thing you do is you take off the brake caliper, the entire brake caliper right here. And you'll see that there's a bolt here and there's a bolt on the bottom. Alright, so these are 18 millimeter. And this is the bottom one. So when both those bolts are off, you can remove the caliper. Alright, so once you get it removed, go ahead and suspend it up and out of the way. I used a bungee cord around the strut spring up here, and that'll keep it up and out of the way for you. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove the cotter pin and this cover here that locks the nut in place behind here, and we're also going to remove the brake disc. So we remove the cotter pin and the cast nut, and there's a little washer in here. So remove all those parts. Remove this thread nut here so that we can get our brake drum or our brake disc off. Alright, so get that off there, and now you'll see that the rotor is loose, so we can remove the rotor. Alright, so now the next thing we got to do is to loosen the tie rod right here, because we got to get this whole knuckle off here. So we got to remove the tie rod, the strut, and then the lower ball joint here. Alright, so strut, ball joint, tie rod. So the tie rod, so it takes 18 millimeter. So you have to undo that first. Alright, so once I get it loose, I'm going to bring it down because I'm going to pound on this thing. So I'm going to bring the bottom edge of this nut right here even with the threads here, so I can pound on this sucker and get it loose. About like that. Now got a hammer here. I'm going to get this thing loose. So there you go. So get the nut off, get the tie rod off, and I'll go ahead and put the nut back on the bottom so this guard and this heath guard and everything will not get lost. Alright, so I got the nut on there. I'm just going to push the tie rod out of the way for now. And next thing I'm going to do is undo these two upper bolts here that hook to the strut here. Alright, so this is a 21 millimeter. Alright, so you can see I've loosened those nuts to the strut. I'm going to go ahead and, I should have done this before, but I'm going to remove this nut that's holding the axle on. And you can have somebody push on the, well, we can't push on the brake now, so I'm going to use an impact wrench. So we should have done this before to loosen this. This is a 1 1/4 inch socket. Alright, so anyway, so that nut's got to come off. And then under this nut there's also a washer, and so there's that washer. So this nut and washer comes out, and now a little tap. Yeah, this will back up a little bit. So we got a hammer. Just tap a little bit. You'll see that it's splined, and it'll move right out of there. So we can get this knuckle out of here. And so I'm going to remove these two bolts up here. So I got the nuts off, and then just tap the bolts out. Alright, so you can see I got the two upper bolts off. And so last thing I gotta do is come down here, and there's a bolt that passes through here. See if you can see it right here. And I gotta get that off so I can then pop this up and take this entire knuckle out, the entire knuckle here. Alright, so this is a 18 millimeter. I put a little extension on it to make it easier to get to, and I'm gonna have to hold the other side. I'm gonna use a crescent wrench to do that. All right, so I got that bolt out. Next thing I'm doing is I'm punching, just using a screwdriver and a hammer, punching this shaft back in and out of these splines here. And then trying to rotate this forward so I can get it clear. All right, once I get that pushed in, you can see that this comes out of here. All right, so I got the axle out, and now I just need to pound up on this to remove it out of the ball joint. All right, one more thing to do before we start pounding to get that thing up. I need to remove this sensor. It's a 10 millimeter. It's just one nut or bolt right here. See? And so you just undo that. So I got the bolt out and just kind of back it off here. So what we're trying to do is loosen this up so it'll come out. And so you keep pounding up, and you got to hit it pretty hard with a pretty good hammer. All right, so with enough pounding, it'll come up and off of the ball joint right there, and now you've got the hub assembly with the steering knuckle, and on the back side is the bearing that needs to come out. Now what you need to do is go ahead and take this to a mechanic shop or a machine shop and have them pop that bearing out and put a new one in for you. Alright, so I've got this back now from the machine shop. They pressed the bearing in for me, so I've put everything back in. The first thing that I did was I dropped the knuckle onto the ball joint right here. And I went ahead and put the bolt and the nut on. The next thing that I did is I turned the whole thing sideways, and I slid the axle back into the splines and put the nut on. I pushed the knuckle back up into the strut. I pounded both the bolts back in the way they came out. And one thing you need to notice is that these nuts these bolts have splines on them, so these heads can't turn. This part needs to turn, but the heads can't turn. So the nuts have to turn, and so you torque those down. All right, so you're gonna torque everything down. These strut bolts get torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. This clinch bolt here gets torqued down to 70 foot-pounds. This gets torqued down, the tie rod bolt gets torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. You're gonna have to use an open-end wrench, and you have to hold this part to keep it from spinning around. So you have to somehow get a torque wrench onto an open-end wrench and get that to 40 foot-pounds of torque. And then this nut here gets torqued down to 180 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, you're going to want to put the ABS sensor back on again, and you're just going to bolt this back on. No torque specification for it. Just take really good care of these things. These things are expensive, so when you're putting it back on, make sure that nothing gets broken. Alright, I'm going to put the disc brake back on, back over the studs, and turn down this little nut here that we took off originally, so it'll tighten up against the hub. Alright, next, got the bearing, the nut torqued down here. I'm going to put this spring washer back on. Then we're going to put this lock nut on and align the hole right there. Alright, then you pass the cotter pin through and bend it back. Next thing we need to do is to put our brake back on. Alright, so I got the calipers back on, and we torque these two bolts here down to 77 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, so that's it. Double check everything. Alright, so you put the tire back on and the job's done.